The gold sunrise spilled across the desolate streets of Montrose, Colorado, as Faith Galloway stared blankly at the doctor's solemn expression, his words echoing through her mind like thunder across empty plains. 3 miscarriages in 5 years, and now the verdict her womb would never bear life. At 32, she stood alone in a town that whispered behind her back, carrying the weight of unfulfilled promises and a future barren of the children she'd dreamed of since girlhood. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Galloway," Dr. Peterson said, closing his medical bag with a definitive click. "There's nothing more to be done. Perhaps acceptance is the kindest path forward." Faith nodded mechanically, her throat too tight for words. The doctor saw himself out of her small homestead cabin, leaving her surrounded by the modest furnishings her late husband Robert had built with his own hands before typhoid took him 2 winters past. The year was 1878, and the Colorado Territory held as much cruelty as it did beauty. She moved to the window, watching dust devils dance across the hard, packed earth. The small ranch they'd built together was failing without Robert's strength. Soon, she might lose everything: the land, the few cattle that remained, and the last tangible connection to the life they'd planned. Children to carry on their name, to work the land, to love. Faith pulled her shawl tighter, though the May morning wasn't cold. Empty. That's what she was now. Empty as the cradle in the corner, lovingly carved but never used. 2 days later, Faith sat in Montrose's only church, not praying but simply existing in the quiet. The settlement had grown considerably since the railroad had pushed through 5 years earlier, bringing miners, ranchers, and drifters alike to the high mountain valley. She often came here when the silence of her cabin grew too oppressive. "Mrs. Galloway." She turned to find Sheriff Thomas Miller standing awkwardly in the aisle, hat in hand. His weathered face looked unusually grave. "I've got some difficult news. Group of rustlers hit your south pasture last night, took most of your remaining stock." Faith absorbed this blow with the dull acceptance of someone who'd already lost too much to be surprised by further misfortune. "I've gathered a small posse to track them. We'll do our best to recover your cattle." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, her voice hollow, "though I don't see what difference it makes now." She stood to leave, and the sheriff cleared his throat. "There's something else. Got a telegram this morning from Durango. Your brother-in-law, Charles Galloway, he's passed. Influenza." Faith closed her eyes. Charles had been managing their shared mining interests. Robert and Charles had staked adjoining claims years ago. It had been their small safety net, the trickle of income that had kept her afloat since Robert's death. Was there anyone to inherit his share? Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably. "That's the thing. Seems he took a partner some months back. Fellow's on his way here now to sort out the business arrangements." Faith nodded, numb to this new complication. "When he arrives, send him to me." 4 days later, Faith was hanging laundry when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall man on a bay stallion rode toward her cabin, dust billowing behind him. As he drew closer, she could make out a lean, powerful frame, broad shoulders beneath a worn duster. He rode with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the saddle. He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His face was tanned and weathered from sun and wind, with lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose had clearly been broken once, but there was something magnetic in his steady gaze. "Mrs. Galloway, I'm Kieran Nash." His voice was deep with a slight rasp. "I was Charles Galloway's business partner." Faith nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Nash, I've been expecting you." She invited him inside, offering coffee which he accepted with a grateful nod. Up close, she guessed him to be in his late 30s, his blue eyes sharp and assessing as they took in the modest cabin. "I was sorry to hear about Charles," she said, placing a steaming cup before him. "Though I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years." Nash nodded. "He spoke highly of you and your husband, said Robert was the finest man he knew." A pang went through her at the mention of her husband. Charles and Robert were close. They came west together from Pennsylvania. "Charles told me the story." Nash sipped his coffee. "Also told me about the claim you and Robert shared with him." Faith tensed. "That mine is half mine by right. It's all I have left." Nash's expression softened. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mrs. Galloway. In fact, I'm here to make an offer." He explained how he'd partnered with Charles when the older man needed funds for new equipment. They'd struck a promising vein just before Charles fell ill, but needed additional investment to exploit it properly. "I've got the capital, but I need someone with legal claim to Charles' share. That would be you, as Robert's widow." Faith studied him skeptically. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Nash?" "A business arrangement. I'll provide the investment and the labor. You contribute your legal claim. We split the profits." Faith considered his words. "And if there are no profits, mining's a gamble at best." A smile touched Nash's lips, transforming his rugged features. "I've never been afraid of a gamble, Mrs. Galloway, but I'm no fool either. There's silver in that mountain. Charles and I proved it." Faith wavered, uncertain. Then she remembered the doctor's verdict, the rustled cattle, the failing ranch. What choice did she have? "I need time to think about it." Nash nodded, rising to leave. "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel in town, but don't take too long. Spring runoff's coming and we need to reinforce the main shaft before then." As he reached the door, he paused. "I heard about your cattle. Sheriff says the rustlers headed toward Utah territory. Not much hope of recovery." Faith swallowed hard. "It seems hope is in short supply these days, Mr. Nash." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unexpectedly gentle. "Sometimes, Mrs. Galloway, hope comes from unexpected quarters." The next morning, Faith rode into town, her decision made. She found Nash at the assayer's office, examining ore samples with intense concentration. When he saw her, he straightened, giving her his full attention. "I'll accept your offer, Mr. Nash, with one condition," she said without preamble. "Name it. I want to see the mine for myself. I want to understand what I'm investing in." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by respect. "Fair enough. It's a 2-day ride from here. When would you like to leave?" "Tomorrow, if possible. I have arrangements to make for my absence." Nash nodded. "I'll be ready at first light." That evening, as Faith packed provisions, she questioned her sanity. A respectable widow didn't travel alone with a man she barely knew, yet something about Nash's straightforward manner inspired trust. And what did she have to lose? Her reputation. In a town that already whispered about poor barren Faith Galloway. What did it matter? They departed at dawn, Nash leading the way on his bay stallion while Faith followed on her sturdy mare. They rode in companionable silence through the morning, the high country gradually giving way to more rugged terrain. "How long have you been in Colorado territory, Mr. Nash?" Faith finally asked as they stopped to rest the horses. "Call me Kieran," he said, offering her his canteen. "Been out west 15 years now. Started in California during the gold rush, then moved on to Nevada, Arizona, now here." "You follow the strikes," he nodded. "That's the way of it, though I've learned to be more selective these days." "And what did you do before becoming a mining man?" Something guarded crossed his expression. "Bit of everything, cowhand mostly. Drove cattle up from Texas a few times. A cowboy turned prospector," she mused. "That's an unusual path." A half-smile touched his lips. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Mrs. Galloway." Faith, she corrected him. If I'm to call you Kieran, you should use my given name. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow. Kieran efficiently built a fire while Faith prepared a simple meal. As darkness fell, the vast canopy of stars emerged overhead, brilliant against the black velvet of the mountain sky. "It's beautiful," Faith said softly, gazing upward. "Robert and I used to sit outside our cabin on summer nights naming constellations." Kieran glanced at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. "You loved him very much." It wasn't a question, but Faith answered anyway. "Yes, we married young. I was 17, he was 20. Everyone said it wouldn't last, but we proved them wrong." Her voice caught. "Until we couldn't." "How long has it been?" 2 years next month." Faith wrapped her arms around herself. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times like another lifetime entirely." Kieran nodded, poking the fire. "Griefs like that doesn't move in straight lines." Something in his tone made Faith look at him more closely. "You've lost someone too?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My wife and daughter. Fire took them while I was away working, 10 years ago now." "I'm sorry," Faith whispered, understanding anew the shadows behind his eyes. He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Like I said, life takes unexpected turns." They reached the mine by midday the following day. It was set into the side of a steep mountain, the entrance reinforced with timber supports. A small cabin stood nearby, with a lean-to for horses and a crude ore processing setup. "It's not much to look at," Kieran admitted as they dismounted. "But what matters is inside." He lit 2 lanterns, handing one to Faith before leading her into the mine shaft. She followed cautiously, the air growing cooler as they ventured deeper. The passage was narrow but well constructed, with solid timber supports every few feet. "Charles was meticulous about safety," Kieran explained. "Never took chances." About 200 feet in, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Kieran held his lantern toward the far wall, illuminating a vein of dark rock shot through with silvery threads. "This is what we found 3 months ago," he said, his voice resonating in the enclosed space. "High-grade silver ore. The vein's at least 2 feet thick and runs deep." Faith stepped closer, examining the glittering rock face. "And you're certain it will yield enough to make a profit?" The assay results were promising. "With proper equipment, we could pull $50 of silver per ton, maybe more." Faith considered this, mentally calculating. "That would be substantial. Enough to make us both comfortable," Kieran agreed. "But it will take work and investment." Faith traced a finger along the silver-streaked rock. "Show me what needs to be done." Over the next few hours, Kieran explained his plans for expanding the operation: additional timber supports, a better drainage system, more efficient ore processing. Faith listened attentively, asking pointed questions that clearly surprised him. "You know more about mining than I expected," he remarked as they emerged back into sunlight. Faith smiled faintly. "Robert talked about little else for years. I learned by osmosis." They spent the night in the cabin, Kieran insisting Faith take the single bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fireplace. As she lay awake listening to his steady breathing, Faith realized she felt more alive than she had in months. The mine represented possibility, not just financial security, but purpose. In the morning, they began the journey back to Montrose, discussing details of their partnership as they rode. "I can have the legal papers drawn up within the week," Kieran said. "Once that's settled, I'll start hiring men and ordering equipment." "How soon before the mine is producing regularly?" 2 months, maybe 3. Depends on weather and how quickly we can get equipment up here." Faith nodded, thinking ahead. "My ranch is failing. I've lost most of my cattle and I can't manage the place alone. I've been considering selling." Kieran studied her profile. Don't make any decisions yet. The mind could change everything. Perhaps, she conceded. But even if it does, what am I holding on to the ranch for? There's no one to pass it to, no future generation to consider. The words escaped before she could stop them, and Faith immediately regretted her candor. She wasn't in the habit of sharing personal matters with virtual strangers. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. No family at all. Faith shook her head. My parents died years ago. I have a sister in Boston, but we rarely correspond. She disapproved of my marrying Robert and moving west. And you and Robert never had children. The question pierced her like a physical pain. No, she said shortly. We did not. Something in her tone must have warned him off, because Kieran changed the subject, pointing out landmarks as they traveled. By the time they reached Montrose the following day, they had established a comfortable rapport. I'll come by tomorrow with the partnership agreement, Kieran said as he left Faith at her cabin. Take time to read it carefully before signing. True to his word, Kieran arrived the next afternoon with papers drawn up by Montrose's only lawyer. Faith read them meticulously, impressed by the fairness of the terms. They established a 50-50 split of profits after expenses, with Kieran managing day-to-day operations while Faith retained oversight of financial records. This seems equitable, she said, reaching for a pen. Though I confess, I'll be relieved when there's something to show for it. There will be, Kieran assured her. I'll ride out tomorrow to begin work. Over the next month, Faith saw little of Kieran as he threw himself into developing the mine. She received occasional notes updating her on progress, each one more optimistic than the last. The vein was proving richer than expected. He'd hired 6 experienced miners. Equipment was arriving from Denver. Meanwhile, Faith faced her own challenges. Without ranch hands or sufficient cattle, maintaining the property was becoming impossible. When her neighbor, Elias Brown, offered to buy her remaining livestock and lease her pasture land, she reluctantly agreed. June brought scorching heat, and the unwelcome news that the bank was foreclosing on 3 nearby ranches. Faith feared hers would be next, despite her efforts to make payments on Robert's outstanding loans. One sweltering afternoon, she was repairing a leaky roof when Kieran's distinctive figure appeared on the horizon. He rode straight to her cabin, dismounting with unusual haste. We've hit a major strike, he announced without preamble, eyes bright with excitement. A vein twice the size of the original with higher silver content. Faith nearly lost her balance on the ladder. You're certain? Just got the assay results. He pulled a paper from his vest pocket, handing it up to her. See for yourself. The report confirmed his claim. The new vein yielded almost twice the silver content of the first. Faith descended the ladder carefully, hands trembling slightly. This changes everything, she said. Kieran nodded, his grin infectious. We've already extracted enough ore to make our first significant shipment. I came to bring you this. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch. When Faith opened it, she found coins totaling nearly $500 more money than she'd seen at once since Robert's death. This is just the beginning, Kieran promised. By year's end, we could be clearing 10 times this amount monthly. For the first time in years, Faith felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. I don't know what to say. Say you'll have dinner with me to celebrate, Kieran suggested, his manner suddenly almost shy. There's a new restaurant in town. They even have tablecloths. Faith hesitated, aware of the impropriety. A widow dining alone with an unmarried man would certainly set tongues wagging. Yet hadn't she already abandoned convention by entering into business with him? I'd like that, she said finally, though I have nothing suitable to wear for a fine restaurant. Kieran's gaze traveled over her work dress and dirt-smudged hands. "You look perfect to me," he said, then quickly added, "but take your time. I can wait." An hour later, wearing her best dress, a navy blue affair she'd last worn to church 3 months ago, Faith rode into town with Kieran. The restaurant was indeed the finest Montrose had to offer, with actual glass windows and linen napkins. Several heads turned as they entered, and Faith heard the unmistakable hush of whispers. Kieran either didn't notice or chose to ignore it, guiding her to a corner table with the confidence of a man, unconcerned with others' opinions. Over a meal of roast beef and vegetables finer than anything Faith had eaten in years, Kieran shared stories of his past boyhood in Ohio, cattle drives through Indian Territory, prospecting in the Sierra Nevadas. He spoke vividly, with a gift for detail that made her feel she was experiencing his adventures firsthand. "And what of you?" he asked eventually. "What brought a well-spoken young woman from Pennsylvania to the wilds of Colorado?" Faith smiled, warming to the subject. "Robert, primarily. He had dreams as big as mountains, but I was hardly reluctant. I'd read dime novels about the West since childhood. The idea of carving a life from untamed land appealed to me. Most women would have been terrified. Perhaps I was naive," she admitted. "The reality proved harsher than the novels suggested. But there's something honest about this place. The land doesn't pretend to be gentle. It demands respect." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes that it does. As they finished their meal, the restaurant's owner approached their table, beaming. "Mr. Nash, Mrs. Galloway, I hear congratulations are in order. Word of your silver strike is all over town." Faith glanced at Kieran, who shrugged apologetically. News travels fast in mining country. By the time they left the restaurant, several townspeople had stopped to offer congratulations. Faith found herself unaccustomed to being the subject of envy rather than pity. "I should warn you," Kieran said as they walked to their horses. "Success breeds attention, not all of it welcome. There are already men in town asking about our claim." Faith frowned. "Claim jumpers?" "Not yet. But we should be vigilant. I've hired a man to guard the mine when we're not there." As they rode back to Faith's ranch, the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. They traveled in comfortable silence until they reached her cabin. "Thank you for dinner," Faith said as Kieran helped her dismount. "It's been a long time since I had an evening out." "The pleasure was mine." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be staying in town tonight, heading back to the mine tomorrow. Is there anything you need?" Faith shook her head, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "When will you return?" 2 weeks at most. We need to expand the main shaft to access the new vein properly." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "You know, Faith, I've met few women with your resilience. Most would have folded under the weight of what you've endured." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Faith standing in her yard with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity. True to Kieran's prediction, the mine began producing steadily, yielding enough silver to attract attention throughout the territory. Faith found herself suddenly sought after by townspeople who had previously avoided her, including several widowers who began making transparent excuses to call at her ranch. She rebuffed these attentions gently but firmly, her thoughts increasingly occupied by Kieran. His visits to Montrose became regular events as he coordinated ore shipments and supply deliveries, and he never failed to bring Faith detailed reports on the mine's progress, along with her share of the profits. Often he stayed for supper, the two of them talking late into the evening about everything from books to politics to childhood memories. Faith discovered he had a quick wit beneath his reserved exterior, and a depth of knowledge that belied his frontier background. One evening in late August, as they sat on her porch watching a spectacular sunset, Kieran broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "The bank manager approached me today," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Asked if I was interested in buying this property. Seems he expects you'll be selling soon." Faith's hand stilled in her lap. "Mr. Wilson presumes too much." "Then you're not selling," she sighed. "I haven't decided. The truth is, I can't maintain this place alone. With the mine's success, I could afford to hire help, but—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the emptiness she felt when she looked at the land she and Robert had meant to fill with children and life. "But it's not the same," Kieran finished for her. Faith nodded, grateful for his understanding. "The dreams Robert and I had for this place died with him, and now—" She stopped, the familiar grief rising in her throat. "Now what?" Kieran prompted gently. Faith stared out at the darkening landscape, the decision to confide in him made almost without conscious thought. "I went to see Dr. Peterson before Robert died. We'd been trying for a child for years without success. He told me then it was unlikely I would ever conceive, though he couldn't say why for certain." She took a steadying breath. "After Robert passed, I held on to hope that perhaps someday I might still have a family, that his death needn't mean the end of all our dreams. But then, this spring—" The memory of the doctor's final verdict still had the power to wound. "Dr. Peterson examined me again and determined that scarring from my last miscarriage has made it impossible. I can never bear children." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but once started, the words had poured out like water through a broken dam. Kieran was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and fierce. "Life's taken much from you, Faith. Your husband, your hopes for children. But you're still here, still standing. That counts for something." "Does it?" She looked at him, allowing him to see the full measure of her pain. "What purpose does my life serve now? I've lost my last hope of a child, the continuation of everything Robert and I built. What remains?" Kieran reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his larger one. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip gentle yet somehow anchoring. "Then I'll give you a life full of love," he said simply. Faith's breath caught. "What are you saying?" His blue eyes held her steadily. "I'm saying I care for you, Faith, more than I expected to care for anyone again. These past months, watching you face each challenge with grace and courage, it's awakened something in me I thought died with my wife and daughter." He released her hand, as if fearing he'd overstepped. "I know it's too soon. You're still grieving Robert, still processing all you've lost. I don't expect anything, but I want you to know that your life has purpose, that you matter deeply to me." Faith sat frozen, unable to process the emotions coursing through her. Gratitude, confusion, an unexpected flutter of something that felt dangerously like hope. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. Kieran smiled gently. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that whatever you decide about the ranch, about the future, you're not alone anymore." He stood to leave, and Faith watched him go with a curious mixture of trepidation and possibility swirling inside her. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind replaying Kieran's words over and over. "Then I'll give you a life full of love." What did that mean exactly? And more importantly, what did she want it to mean? The next morning, Faith rode to town, ostensibly to purchase supplies but really seeking clarity. She found herself outside the church, where she often went when troubled. Inside, she sat in a pew, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. She hadn't expected to feel attraction for another man after Robert. The depth of her grief had seemed evidence that such a love could only come once in a lifetime. Yet there was no denying the quickening of her pulse when Kieran entered a room, the way his smile could brighten even her darkest days. Was it a betrayal of Robert's memory to consider opening her heart again? Or would he, who had loved her so completely, want her to find happiness however she could, and what of children? Kieran knew she could never give him offspring. Would that matter to him eventually, even if it didn't now? Lost in thought, she didn't notice Sheriff Miller until he sat beside her. "Mrs. Galloway, didn't expect to find you here midweek." Faith composed herself quickly. "Just taking a moment of reflection, Sheriff," he nodded, his expression grave. "There's something you should know. Had word from the marshal in Grand Junction. They caught those rustlers that took your cattle back in May." "Oh, that's good news, I suppose, though it hardly matters now. Thing is, they weren't ordinary rustlers. They're part of the Bennett gang, outlaws wanted in 3 territories. Faith frowned. "I don't understand why that concerns me." Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Because your partner, Kieran Nash, was recognized by one of them. Claims Nash rode with the Bennett gang years ago before coming to Colorado." Faith's heart seemed to stop. "That's absurd. Kieran is a mining man, a businessman. Now, perhaps. But according to this fella, Nash was once known as Colorado Kieran, the gang's most dangerous gunman." Faith stood abruptly. "I don't believe it. This man is clearly lying to save his own skin." Sheriff Miller raised his hands placatingly. "I'm just passing along information, Mrs. Galloway. Marshal's sending a deputy to ask some questions, that's all." Faith left the church in a daze, her mind racing. It couldn't be true. The Kieran she knew was honorable, compassionate, gentle even, not some notorious outlaw. Yet hadn't there always been shadows behind his eyes? Gaps in his stories, periods of his life mentioned only vaguely if at all. She rode home in turmoil, unsure what to think or who to trust. By evening, she'd resolved to confront Kieran directly when he next came to town. But that resolution was tested sooner than expected when his distinctive knock sounded on her door after nightfall. He stood on her porch, illuminated by the lantern she carried, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" he asked. "There's something I need to tell you." Faith's heart pounded as she stepped aside to admit him. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "Sheriff Miller paid me a visit today," he began without preamble. "Seems my past has caught up with me." Faith set the lantern down carefully. "Then it's true? You were an outlaw?" Kieran met her gaze directly. "Yes. From 1864 to 1868 I rode with the Bennett gang. I'm not proud of it, but I won't deny it either." Faith sank into a chair, struggling to reconcile this revelation with the man she thought she knew. "Why? How could you become involved with such men?" Kieran paced the small room. "After my family died, I was lost, consumed by rage and grief. I drifted, took to drinking. Jim Bennett found me in that state, offered me purpose of a sort." He shook his head. "I'm not excusing what I did. I made choices, terrible ones." "Did you kill people?" The question escaped before Faith could stop it. Kieran's face tightened. "Yes. In gunfights, not cold blood, but yes. I have blood on my hands." Faith closed her eyes, trying to absorb this. "And after, what changed?" "We raided a homestead in eastern Colorado. I thought it was empty, we all did. But there was a boy hiding in the root cellar. Couldn't have been more than 12. Kieran's voice grew hoarse. "He had a shotgun, tried to defend his family's place. One of the gang shot him without hesitation." He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumped. "I can still see his face. Reminded me of my daughter, somehow same determined expression. Something broke in me that day. I left the gang that night, rode until my horse nearly collapsed. Eventually made my way to California, determined to start fresh." "And did you start fresh?" I tried. Worked honest jobs, saved money, eventually started prospecting, never touched a gun except for hunting or protection. His eyes sought hers. The man I was then isn't who I am now, Faith, but I can't change the fact that he existed. Faith stood, needing movement. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of seeing in your eyes what I'm seeing now, disappointment, disgust. But I need you to know I never lied about the mine or about my feelings for you. Faith turned away, unable to face him. I need time to process this, Kieran, please. He nodded, reaching for his hat. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for my past, but for not trusting you with the truth sooner. After he left, Faith sat in her darkened cabin, her thoughts churning. She felt betrayed, yet something in Kieran's confession rang with painful honesty. Hadn't she seen his remorse firsthand, witnessed the man he'd become rather than the man he'd been? 3 days passed without word from Kieran. Faith learned from town gossip that a deputy marshal had indeed come to Montrose, questioned Kieran, and left without arresting him. Apparently, he'd been granted amnesty years earlier for testimony against other gang members. On the 4th day, Faith rode to the mine, driven by an impulse she couldn't fully explain. She found Kieran deep in the main shaft, personally installing new support beams. He straightened when he saw her, surprise and wariness in his expression. I didn't expect you, he said, setting down his tools. Nor I you, she replied. I thought you might have left. He shook his head. This is our mine, our business. I wouldn't abandon that regardless of personal matters. Faith studied him in the lantern light, this complicated man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. I've been thinking about redemption, she said quietly. About how we're all shaped by our pasts but not defined by them. Kieran remained silent, waiting. I can't pretend I'm not disturbed by what you told me, Faith continued. But neither can I deny the man I've come to know these past months, a man of integrity, of compassion. That man exists because of what I lived through, not despite it, Kieran said. I had to lose everything, become someone I despised before I could find my way back to myself. Faith nodded slowly. I think I understand that more than you know. Losing Robert, losing my hopes for motherhood, I've had to redefine who I am, what my life means. She took a step closer to him. You asked me what purpose my life serves now. I'm still finding the answer to that, but I know I'm not ready to close the door on possibilities, including you. Relief washed over Kieran's face. That's more than I dared hope for. I'm not saying I'm ready for whatever it is you're offering, Faith clarified, but I'm willing to continue our partnership, both business and personal, and see where it leads. Kieran nodded, respecting her boundaries. That's all I ask. As September gave way to October, Faith and Kieran settled into a new rhythm. The mine continued to prosper, yielding enough silver to warrant hiring additional workers and upgrading equipment. Faith took a more active role in the business, using her natural organizational skills to bring order to the accounting. Kieran, meanwhile, proved his words through actions, treating Faith with consistent respect, never pressuring her for more than she was ready to give. Their friendship deepened, conversations flowing more easily as the shadow of his revelation gradually receded. One crisp October afternoon, Faith was reviewing ledgers in the small office they'd built at the mine when a commotion outside drew her attention. She emerged to find Kieran confronting 3 rough-looking men. This claim is properly registered, Kieran was saying, his stance wary but controlled. You have no business here. The tallest of the strangers stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. Word is you're pulling out $50 of silver per ton. That's mighty tempting. Faith moved to Kieran's side, conscious of the workers watching nervously from nearby. This property is legally owned by Mr. Nash and myself, she said firmly. Sheriff Miller can confirm our claim is properly filed. The man's gaze shifted to Faith, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well now, ain't you a pretty piece? Perhaps we can come to some arrangement that doesn't involve paperwork. Kieran's posture changed subtly, a dangerous stillness coming over him that Faith had never witnessed before. You're speaking to a lady, he said, his voice deceptively soft. Apologize and leave while you still can. Something in his tone made the man hesitate, reassessing the situation. After a tense moment, he touched the brim of his hat mockingly. No offense intended, madam. We'll be on our way for now. As they mounted their horses and rode off, Faith released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Who were they? Claim jumpers, Kieran said grimly. Testing our defenses, they'll be back probably at night. He proved correct. 2 nights later, Faith was awakened by urgent pounding on her door. It was one of their miners, breathless with exertion. Attack at the mine, Mrs. Galloway. Mr. Nash said to fetch you to town right away. You'll be safer there. Heart racing, Faith dressed quickly and rode with the miner toward Montrose. Halfway there, they met Sheriff Miller and a hastily assembled posse heading toward the mine. What's happened? Faith demanded. Those men returned with reinforcements, Miller explained. Tried to take the mine by force. There was gunfire. Nash is holding them off, but it's a bad situation. Faith's blood ran cold. I'm coming with you. Mrs. Galloway, that's not wise, it's my mine. She cut him off. And Kieran is my partner. I'm coming. They arrived to find the mine entrance barricaded, with Kieran and 3 miners exchanging occasional shots with attackers positioned in the surrounding rocks. The sheriff's arrival turned the tide, the claim jumpers retreating after a brief but intense exchange of gunfire. Faith found Kieran behind an overturned ore cart, a bloodied bandage around his left arm. You're hurt, she said, kneeling beside him. Bullet grazed me. It's nothing. His eyes searched her face. You shouldn't be here, Faith. It's not safe. Neither should you, yet here we are. She examined his wound, relieved to find it was indeed minor. These men, they could have killed you. Something flickered in Kieran's eyes, not fear, but a weary resignation. Violence has a way of finding me, no matter how far I run from it. In the aftermath, as the sheriff organized a search for the claim jumpers, Faith insisted on treating Kieran's wound properly. They sat in the cabin's lamplight, Faith carefully cleaning and rebandaging his arm. You handled yourself well back there, she observed. Kept your men safe, protected our investment. Kieran watched her work, his expression troubled. I had to use skills I promised myself I'd never rely on again. It felt too familiar. Faith secured the bandage and sat back. You used those skills to protect, not harm. That makes all the difference. He caught her hand, his gaze intense. When I saw them looking at you, heard how they spoke to you, I wanted to kill them, Faith. That darkness is still in me, however deep I bury it. There's darkness in all of us, she said quietly. What matters is the choices we make despite it. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Faith did what she'd been thinking about for weeks. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Kieran froze momentarily, then responded with careful restraint, the kiss gentle despite the tension thrumming through him. When they parted, his eyes were questioning. I'm not made of glass, Kieran, Faith murmured. I won't break. I know, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But it matters too much to rush. The claim jumpers were caught 2 days later attempting to rob a stagecoach near Grand Junction. With the immediate danger past, Faith and Kieran focused on repairing the damage to the mine and strengthening its defenses. As they worked side by side, their relationship evolved naturally, physical awareness adding a new dimension to their established connection. Kieran remained respectful of Faith's boundaries, never presuming, always letting her set the pace of their growing intimacy. By mid-November, with winter approaching, they faced practical decisions about the mine's operation during the harsh mountain months. "We should shut down the most remote section until spring," Kieran advised as they reviewed maps in Faith's cabin. "Concentrate on the main shaft where we have the best access." Faith nodded, making notes. The business discussion flowed easily between them, their partnership now a seamless blend of professional and personal. Later, as they sat before the fire drinking coffee, Kieran broached a subject that had been on both their minds. Winter's coming fast. The path to the mine will be impassable soon, at least for weeks at a time. "Yes, I've been thinking about that." Faith set down her cup. "You can't stay at the mine. It's too isolated, too dangerous if there's a blizzard." Kieran studied the fire. "I could take a room in town for the season." Faith gathered her courage. "Or you could stay here." His eyes snapped to hers. "Faith, not like that," she clarified hastily. "Not yet." "But the ranch has the old bunkhouse. It's small but solid. You could make it comfortable enough." Relief and something like disappointment crossed Kieran's face. "Are you sure? People will talk." Faith smiled wryly. "People already talk. I'm a widow in business with a bachelor." By Montrose standards, we're practically scandalous already. Kieran laughed, the sound warming her more than the fire. "Fair point." 2 weeks later, the first major snowstorm of the season blanketed Montrose in white. Kieran, now installed in the renovated bunkhouse, helped Faith prepare the main house for winter, chopping extra firewood, insulating windows, stocking preserves in the root cellar. As December advanced, they established new routines. Mornings, Kieran would check the livestock and clear paths if it had snowed overnight. Faith would prepare breakfast, which they would share in her kitchen before tackling the day's tasks. Evenings, they would dine together, then talk or read by the fire until Kieran reluctantly returned to the bunkhouse. Faith found herself increasingly aware of the artificial nature of their arrangement. Their feelings for each other had grown obvious to both, yet they maintained this careful distance, partly out of respect for propriety, partly from mutual caution about taking such a significant step. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolation imposed by winter weather. Faith decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons, while Kieran surprised her by returning from a rare trip to town with small gifts for under the simple tree they'd cut together. On Christmas Eve, they attended services at Montrose's church, driving Faith's sleigh through snow-covered landscapes that glittered like diamonds in the moonlight. The church was warm and bright with candles, the congregation's voices raised in carols that echoed Faith's own sense of renewed hope. Afterward, they declined invitations to join various townspeople for celebrations, preferring to return to the quiet intimacy of Faith's cabin. There, they exchanged modest gifts: a finely crafted leather journal from Kieran to Faith, and from her to him, a silver pocket watch to replace the worn timepiece he carried. "It's beautiful," he said, examining the watch's intricate engravings. "Far too fine for a rough character like me." Faith smiled. "I had it engraved. Open the back." He did so, reading aloud the inscription, "To K, time for new beginnings." His eyes met hers, emotion making his voice rough. "Is that what this is? A new beginning?" Faith moved closer to him on the sofa. "I hope so." "These past months, despite everything, the revelations about your past, the troubles at the mine, I've found myself looking forward rather than back for the first time since Robert died." Kieran took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "And what do you see looking forward?" "Possibilities," she answered honestly. A life different from what I imagined, but potentially just as meaningful. A partnership in every sense of the word. She took a deep breath. I'm ready, Kieran. Ready to stop pretending we're just business partners or friends. Ready to acknowledge what's growing between us. Joy and caution warred in his expression. You're certain? I don't want you to feel pressured by circumstance or proximity. Faith laughed softly. I'm 32 years old, Kieran. I know my own mind and heart. His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward, cupping her face in his hands with exquisite tenderness before kissing her, this time without restraint. Faith responded in kind, the passion they'd both been tempering finally given freedom. When they parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Faith Galloway, have for months now. And I love you, she whispered back, the words bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. I didn't think I would feel this way again. Nor I, he admitted. After Lily and Sarah died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. Faith nestled against him, savoring the solid warmth of his embrace. Tell me about them, your wife and daughter. Kieran was quiet for a moment, then began speaking of the family he'd lost: Lily's quick wit and gentle spirit, little Sarah's infectious laughter and boundless curiosity. Faith listened, understanding this sharing was itself a gift, a final barrier between them dissolving. When he finished, she shared her own stories of Robert, their early days together, his dreams for their future, the pain of watching illness claim him far too young. He would want you to be happy, Kieran said softly. As I believe Lily would want for me. Faith nodded against his shoulder. I think so too. Later, as midnight approached, Kieran reluctantly rose to leave for the bunkhouse. At the door, Faith caught his hand. Stay, she said simply. He searched her face. Are you sure? Completely. That night, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their coming together both tender and passionate. For Faith, the experience was a revelation, not a betrayal of her past, but an affirmation of life's continuing capacity for joy. Afterward, lying in Kieran's arms, Faith felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. His heart beat steady beneath her ear. She allowed herself to envision a future with this man, building something lasting together, facing whatever challenges came their way as partners in the truest sense. What are you thinking? Kieran murmured, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. That I never expected to find this again. That despite everything I've lost, life still had this gift waiting. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. We've both been given a second chance. I intend to make the most of it. The new year arrived with record snowfall, effectively isolating Faith's ranch for weeks. They used the time to plan for the future, discussing expansion of the mine, improvements to the ranch, and increasingly, their personal relationship. I want to do this properly, Kieran said one evening as they sat before the fire. When spring comes and the roads are clear, I'd like to speak with Reverend Matthews. Faith looked up from her mending, her heart skipping. Are you proposing, Mr. Nash? His smile was warm but serious. I believe I am, Mrs. Galloway, though not very eloquently. Setting aside her work, Faith moved to kneel before him. Then allow me to help you. Ask me directly. Kieran took both her hands in his. Faith Galloway, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can promise you a life full of love, if not without challenges. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. Their engagement remained private until March, when improved weather finally allowed travel to town. They made the journey together, first stopping at the assayer's office to arrange shipment of the silver ore that had accumulated over winter, then visiting Reverend Matthews to request a spring wedding. The news spread through Montrose with predictable speed. Most reactions were supportive, The couple's prosperity made them welcome additions to the town's business community, though a few disapproving glances followed Faith from those who considered her remarriage too soon after widowhood. "Ignore them," Kieran advised when she mentioned it. "Our happiness isn't subject to their approval." April brought the wedding, a simple affair held in Montrose's church with the entire mining crew in attendance, along with various townspeople who had become friends. Faith wore a new dress of deep blue silk, ordered specially from Denver, while Kieran cut an impressive figure in a proper suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Faith felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken much from her husband, her hopes for children, years of certainty about her path. But standing before Kieran, promising to build a future together, she recognized that those losses had somehow led her here to this unexpected happiness. The celebration afterward was lively, held at Montrose's finest hotel with food and drink flowing freely. As evening approached, Kieran found Faith standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching their guests with a thoughtful expression, having second thoughts. He teased, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, smiling. "Not one, just reflecting on how much has changed in a year. Last spring I thought my life was essentially over. Now I feel as though it's truly beginning." She turned to face him. "There's something I haven't told you, something I've been considering." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious." "It is. I've been corresponding with an orphanage in Denver. There are children there, many children who need homes." Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes. "You're thinking of adoption?" Faith nodded. "I know I can't bear children of my own, but that doesn't mean we couldn't be parents. There's a particular case, 2 siblings, a boy of 7 and his sister, 5. Their parents died of influenza last winter." "You've been thinking about this for some time," Kieran observed, not sounding displeased. "Yes, I wanted to be certain about us first, about our future together." She searched his face anxiously. "What do you think?" "I know it's not the same as having our own." Kieran silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "Faith, my love for you has never been contingent on your ability to bear children. The idea of providing a home for children who need one, it feels right." Relief washed over her. "Truly." "You would consider it, more than consider it. I think it's a wonderful idea." His smile turned reflective. "Sarah would have been 12 this year. After she died, I never thought I'd have the chance to be a father again." Faith's eyes filled with tears. "Then we'll write to the orphanage tomorrow, express our interest formally." Kieran kissed her, heedless of the watching guests. "Mrs. Nash, you continue to amaze me." 1 month later, Faith and Kieran traveled to Denver to meet Thomas and Elizabeth Wilson, the siblings they hoped to adopt. The meeting took place at the orphanage, a well-intentioned but dreary institution housing nearly 50 children of various ages. The children were understandably wary, clinging to each other as they were introduced to the couple who might become their new parents. Thomas, protective of his younger sister, answered questions politely but guardedly. Elizabeth barely spoke at all, her wide eyes taking in these strange adults with apprehension. "They've been through much," the matron explained. "Lost their parents, their home, everything familiar. It will take time for them to trust again." Faith nodded, her heart aching for these small, wounded souls. "We understand. We've experienced loss ourselves." Over the next 3 days, Faith and Kieran visited the orphanage for increasingly longer periods, gradually building rapport with the children. They brought small gifts: a wooden horse Kieran had carved for Thomas, a rag doll for Elizabeth, and shared stories of the ranch, the mountains, the animals they kept. By the 3rd day, Elizabeth had begun to smile, especially when Faith sang the same lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. Thomas remained more cautious, but his questions about the ranch and the silver mine revealed growing interest. "Would we go to school?" he asked during their final visit. "In Montrose?" "Yes, of course," Faith assured him. "Education is important. But you'd also learn practical skills, riding, caring for animals, perhaps even a bit about mining when you're older." The boy considered this solemnly. "And we would stay together. Lizzie and me, always," Kieran promised. "You'd be brother and sister just as you are now. That wouldn't change." Something in Kieran's tone, the absolute certainty of his promise, seemed to reach Thomas in a way their other assurances hadn't. He gave a single, decisive nod. "Then I think we should come with you." The formal adoption process took another month to complete, paperwork to file, references to provide, home conditions to verify. Finally, in early June, Faith and Kieran returned to Denver to bring the children home. The journey back to Montrose was a mixture of excitement and anxiety for all involved. The children, having never traveled by train before, alternated between wide-eyed wonder at the passing landscape and nervous silence. Faith watched them, her heart full. They were thin, still bearing the physical marks of their ordeal, but there was resilience in them too, the same quality she'd recognized and admired in Kieran when they first met. "They'll be all right," Kieran murmured, reading her thoughts as he often seemed to do. "They're survivors like us." The arrival at the ranch was carefully orchestrated to make the transition as smooth as possible. Faith had prepared rooms for each child, furnished with new bedding, clothes, and toys. The kitchen was stocked with treats, and Kieran had built a swing in the yard oak tree. Elizabeth's face lit up at the sight of the swing, while Thomas was immediately drawn to the horses in the corral. The initial awkwardness gradually eased as the children explored their new home, cautious excitement replacing apprehension. That night, after tucking the exhausted children into their beds, Faith and Kieran sat on the porch, the familiar mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "It won't be easy," Kieran said quietly. "They've experienced trauma we can't fully understand. There will be difficult days ahead." Faith leaned against his shoulder. "Yes, but there will be good days too, and we'll face both kinds together." The adjustment period proved challenging, as expected. Thomas suffered nightmares about the illness that took his parents. Elizabeth developed a fear of being separated from her brother, following him everywhere. Both children tested boundaries, sometimes with tantrums, other times with withdrawal, but there were breakthroughs too. Elizabeth's delight in helping Faith bake bread. Thomas's proud expression when he learned to ride the gentle pony Kieran bought specifically for him. The gradual extension of trust as the children began to accept that this new arrangement was permanent, that they wouldn't be abandoned again. By autumn, a new rhythm had established itself in the Nash household. Mornings began with breakfast together before Thomas and Elizabeth left for the small school in Montrose. Kieran divided his time between the mine, which continued to prosper, and the ranch, which he and Faith had decided to maintain as a working operation. Faith, meanwhile, discovered unexpected fulfillment in motherhood. Though not the biological experience she'd once envisioned, the daily process of nurturing these children, watching them heal and grow, brought a deep satisfaction that filled the void she'd carried for so long. One evening in October, as the family sat around the dinner table, Thomas suddenly asked, "Are we Nashes now, or still Wilsons?" Faith exchanged a glance with Kieran. They'd been careful not to pressure the children about surnames, allowing them to maintain that connection to their biological parents. "That's for you to decide," Kieran said gently. "You'll always be Thomas and Elizabeth Wilson by birth. That's an important part of who you are." But legally, you're part of our family now, which means you could use Nash if you wanted to. Thomas considered this seriously. What do you think, Lizzie? Nash or Wilson? Elizabeth, who had blossomed from the near-silent child they'd first met into a chatty 5-year-old, didn't hesitate. I want to be Elizabeth Nash, she declared. Because this is our home now, Thomas nodded slowly. I think our parents would understand. They would want us to be happy. Faith blinked back tears. Yes, I believe they would. That night, after the children were asleep, Faith found Kieran in the barn, repairing tack by lantern light. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his broad back. I never thought I could feel this complete again, she said softly. After everything I lost, everything I thought I'd never have, you've given me more than I dared hope for. Kieran set aside his work, turning to face her. We've given each other a second chance, Faith. You, me, those children were all healing together, becoming something new. Faith looked up at this man who had entered her life when she was at her lowest point, who had promised her a life full of love, and then set about delivering on that promise in ways neither of them could have anticipated. I love you, Kieran Nash, she whispered, with everything I am. His kiss was tender, a promise renewed. And I love you, Faith Nash, today, tomorrow, always. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow, while inside the warm barn, Faith and Kieran held each other, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together and the family they were building from the broken pieces of their pasts. In the bedroom window of the main house, a small figure appeared. Elizabeth, awakened by some childish dream. Seeing her new parents in their embrace, she smiled sleepily before turning back to bed, secure in the knowledge that she was home, she was loved, and tomorrow would bring another day with this family that had chosen her. And in that moment, under the vast Colorado sky, the Nash family, built not of blood but of choice, of second chances and healing hearts, was complete.